Hey guys, so this book review that I'm about to do is technically an ARC review because I read an advanced review copy. Thank you to the publisher at Edelweiss for giving me this copy. However, this book has actually been out for a couple of weeks. I've mentioned I had so many ARCs that kind of had due dates on top of each other that I had to sit on this one for a little bit, just trying to make it all work in the most logical way possible. But I am here to review the book, happy to do it. Sort of. This book is the second book in Gina Maxwell's Deviant King series, and this one is called The Rebel King. I did review an arc of the first book in the series called The Dark King, and if you would like to not be spoiled for that book, and you haven't read it yet, go watch that review instead, because as this is the second book in a series where the plot is continuing on, I do need to briefly touch on some of the events of that book to make this one make sense. Okay, so if you did read that last book, or you don't care about being spoiled, I suppose, in the last book, remember that Caden and Bryn were our couple for that book. And Caden was the king of the Dark Fae. However, there's this curse on the king of the Dark Fae that says that if they mate with another Fae, that basically, even though the rival courts, the Light and Dark Court, can't physically attack each other, they can kill Caden by killing Bryn. It's a whole big thing, blood curses are involved, but basically at the end of that book, in order to protect Bryn, the love of his life, Caden abdicates his throne because the guy who is leading the rival faction, the Light Fae, he's basically made it clear that his mission is to use Bryn to kill Caden. Caden has two brothers, there's Tiernan and Finian. Neither of them are mated, and so it basically just makes sense for Caden to abdicate and have his second brother, Tiernan, take control of the Dark Fae so that Bryn is saved from this blood curse situation. So Caden's second brother, he has been the rebel prince his entire life, basically, right? He's the one of his three brothers who pretends not to have a care in the world, goes out partying, you know, all that kind of stuff. He is the playboy prince. And so the idea of him taking on this mantle of king is nothing that he's ever wanted. He doesn't think that he's going to be good at it. And there's a secondary wrinkle. Right before this happens, Tyrion had entered into a friends with benefits situation with a woman named Fiona. Now, for all Fiona and Tyr know, Fiona is the non-special daughter of the court's conjurer. This is a fae with express magical powers who helped save Bryn's life in the last book. But Fiona doesn't have any of those powers, and in fact, because somewhere up in her fae line there is human blood, she does not have many of the features that would normally mark her as fae either, so she has to hide her appearance because the fae think humans are a far inferior race. When Tyrion wasn't the king in waiting, it wasn't that big of a deal that he and Fiona were together. However, now that he has become basically the king, not yet crowned, but king in waiting, this is a relationship that crosses caste boundaries for the Fae, and it's just not a good idea. However, as we learned in the last book where, you know, Bryn thought that she was human and ended up being the only dark light Fae in existence, Fiona's identity as a non-special Fae is also not at all what it appears to be, and you learn crazy things about Fiona's actual identity. And this happens in conjunction with a order, the New Purity Order, rising up in the streets of Vegas and killing Dark Fae. And so as they're trying to figure out all this new stuff with Fiona's identity, Tyr trying to figure out how to be king, they're also trying to stop these human assassins basically from murdering more Dark Fae, and things just continue to unravel from there. I will give it that this book didn't go in the direction that I thought it was going to with the plot. I don't remember all that much from the first book as far as Fiona is concerned, and when she was on the screen, she was mostly just cast in the role as Bryn's like new best friend character. So I don't really know if her like identity reveal was kind of hinted at all, and I'm not going to tell you what happens, but after that occurs, the way that the conspiracy has to be unraveled. There's some undercover work, but of course that undercover work happens partially at like an undercover BDSM club because this is the Deviant King series. These are very spicy. They are dark BDSM. If you didn't already know that because this is your first introduction to the series, that's what they are. In this one, it just wasn't like integrated as well. It's kind of like this book was trying to be just like a fairly regular fae book, and then like halfway through remembered that one of its defining features is supposed to be BDSM and kink. So that was weird. You know that Tyr and Fiona have a history, but that history previously was just that they were sleeping with each other like a lot. And so you kind of have to just trust that feelings are also already there. Honestly, the most interesting things that are happening are not happening to Fiona and Tyr, and that made this book kind of hard to get through. This book introduces, for example, that there are vampires, and then later on there are also werewolves in this world, and the vampires are led by this guy named Dimitri, and his sister is missing, so he joins into an uneasy alliance with Tyr so that they can try to unravel what's going on together, and that's a really interesting story, and his character is really interesting. You learn things about Tyr's younger brother Finn that are obviously a setup for the next book, which he is going to lead, that are super interesting and have the potential to have a lot of depth to that as a storyline. Bryn and Caden are pregnant, and Bryn's baby, the first Darklight, born baby ever to exist, gives her random telekinetic powers, and so there's a lot of stuff going on there where they don't really know how the baby has those kinds of power. Like I said, there is a reveal with Fiona's identity, but to a certain extent I didn't really mind as much because I was like, well, this is all just gonna work out in the end anyway because they're the main pair of this book and it has to. In that sense, I think this book has just pure middle book syndrome, where the first book set up a really interesting, tension and a plot and this interesting dark fae World Vegas situation going on. And this book repeated a little bit of what that one was doing with the reveal of like Bryn's identity and her being different than she first appears. And so with this book kind of just doing that again, and kind of rehashing a plot that I don't care about, which is the Playboy Prince learning that all along he's been great at responsibility, he just never believed in himself. I was like, okay, it feels a little bit like I'm reading part of the first book again, and then a kind of tired plot I don't really care about, but at the same time, this book is setting up really interesting things for the third book, and I just wish I was reading the third book now. I feel like this happens a lot with trilogies that maybe don't have as much meat to them for 3 books. This happened a lot when I was reading YA, and like trilogies were the really, really big thing, and you would be reading 3 books and the middle one would just sag so much in quality because there was a really exciting opening and a really exciting ending, and then this third book just kind of had to exist kind of with its own story but not really resolving everything. And it does take a lot of skill to make that middle book not dip like that, and I just think that this book just didn't have enough to it not to have that dip in it. At the same time, it had enough to it that I still do want to read the third book, even if I won't be like, rushing to do so. If you are like watching this and trying to decide for yourself if this is a book that you do want to read, but you're not sure if you should put it at the top of your TBR list or not, as far as I'm concerned, I wish that I had waited to read this book when I had the third book to read. That obviously won't be out for a while, but that was the only thing that I was left with at the end of this book, was like, I wish it was the third book. I think the third book is going to be interesting, and this one was just uneven and not as interesting as the first was, or the third has the potential to be. However, if you do want to read it, I don't think it's a bad book. I just think it's disappointing after the first one, but you can always go to your local library or, check out a sample online if you want and just see if it's the kind of thing that you're vibing with right now. I don't regret the time that I spent reading it, but at the same time, it was really, really hard for me to get into it, to be interested and keep reading it. And at the end, again, I wished it was either the first or third book. It's always a really, really hard review to make when your feelings ultimately are just meh. This is probably the second in a trilogy book I've seen do this quite this hard in a while. Hopefully the third book will be better, but right now I just kind of have feelings. So what I did realize when I went to my content calendar to kind of do some edits was that this book is number 5 left to my gigantic arc TBR that I started several months ago when I was like, guys, I have to start reading romance arcs in June and I can't stop until September. We're almost there. I am so close. And I'm really excited about the last 4 arcs in this extended sequence that I have. I think there's going to be some really good ones in there. And especially after this one, I'm just really needing a good juicy romance. So my next one is supposed to be the new Sarah McLean, and I just am so excited. She's never let me down, and I hope she doesn't this time, because this is one of my most, if not my most anticipated books in her Hell's Bells series. So fingers crossed, and I'll see you for that one. Thanks guys. Bye.